Welcome to another episode of Hutch on Hunting. This is Bruce Hutchin, your host, and we're heading up Montana. And I've took one of my friends out of the trout stream, Tom Opre. And if you don't know Tom, you will, because if you're on social media at all, you've heard about his iconic movie that is winning awards across the world, The Last Keeper. Tom, welcome to the show, and we're going to jump right into what was the genesis of The Last Keeper.
Well, Bruce, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on board here. It's great to talk to you and your listeners, and I'm glad to hear that we've got such a fine group of people that really believe in the importance of wildlife and wildlife habitat conservation, and what the founding fathers of our modern conservation ethos, guys like George, and we've done a pretty good job of rewilding, and that's what we're keeping in the back of your mind there, rewilding North America. And it's allowed for us to have the bounties that we have as far as the incredible wildlife populations, both game and non-game populations, and all the national forest and public land. That's all because of our modern conservation ethos. And so you asked me about the film The Last Keeper. A lot of people say, how the heck did you end up in Scotland? Well, besides the fact I got lots of relatives dead all over that island, in the United Kingdom and Ireland. I've had a real interest in Scotland and what's going on. I've got some friends that are in the hunting industry over there, and well, 4 or 5 years ago, while we were working on the film Killing the Shepherd, which is that film we did about the rural community in Zambia, led by a woman chief who wanted to break the bonds of poverty by waging a war against wildlife poaching. That film just blew up, and we've ended up screening that in CITES, the Secretary General of CITES in Geneva, the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, state fishing game agencies, state legislatures. I mean, even Westminster last year. So these films really have a serious impact on educating, especially decision makers. And so I heard this story in Scotland that the keepers, the sporting estate industry, there's this historic, over many hundreds of years where people manage the land specifically to have an offtake of red grouse and to stalk the red deer, which is the red stag Landseer's painting that he did of the monarch in the Glen is a real iconic thing that a lot of people have probably heard or seen. And then obviously the salmon fishing. Everybody wants to do the McNab, right? And get one of each in one day. And so, but I was hearing these really, really serious stories about the fact that the urbanites and many people aligned with this rewilding idea. This is kind of let nature be free. We don't need man's impact on the planet anymore, kind of thing. That these people had been working in concert with politicians to literally shut down conservation in Scotland, which conservation, if you don't know, is the wise use of a natural resource. Gifford Pinochet coined the very first person to coin that terminology back in the late 1800s, early 1900s here in the United States. And that's something that we've done here. Like I said earlier, the reason why we have these incredible wildlife populations, both game and non-game, endangered species, and the recovery that we've seen is all because of that conservation ethos that we hold so dear to our hearts here in North America. And so what I saw and what I heard over there was just unbelievable stories about not only politicians using legislation as a cudgel, to hammer landowners over the head, but also, the unintended consequences of collateral damage for these keepers and their families. And the way the system works over there, the landowner owns the land. They control the hunting and fishing. Now, the game is a public asset. It's you don't possess it until you actually take it, just like here in the United States. But over there, there is no U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There is no state fishing game. There's no wildlife biologist or game wardens running around. It's literally up to the landowners to manage their land, hopefully for the right reasons. And in many cases, they're doing this so that they can maximize on the opportunity to enjoy time on the land, hunting and fishing. And they subsidize this. The government doesn't pay for it. But unfortunately, because of this this effort by rewilders, and it's really what it comes down, Bruce, is that there's a lot of animosity. It's historical biases. I mean, if you take any Scot and you go back far enough in their lineage, you're going to find the oppressed or the oppressors. There's been a lot of conflict, as we know. I mean, who's watched Outlander? Who's watched Braveheart? You know, it's all about conflict in Scotland, and I can tell you, there's still conflict going on in Scotland. And unfortunately, like I said, the collateral damage here are these families. The gamekeeper historically in these communities was someone who was a major figure of importance in these communities. There was somebody that you went to when you needed to fix something or get something done, or if there was a problem, you could go to the gamekeeper. It didn't matter what it was, it didn't have to do with wildlife, but the gamekeeper was somebody that you could rely on because they cared about their communities, and their children are a big part of the community. And I started hearing stories about children being ostracized in their schools. One story even of some children being threatened with having acid thrown in their face, all because they were just the children of gamekeepers. And knowing what I know about what we've done here in North America, and knowing that, ultimately at the end of the day, with the Shepards of Wildlife Society, which is a 501c3 that I helped found with a bunch of wildlife photographers and outdoor filmmakers, we see this huge disconnect in nature when it comes to our modern Western urbanized society. Most people don't even know where their food comes from, and they make decisions that have downstream effects. And this is the epitome of what we're talking about here. You have a population belt in Scotland between Glasgow and Edinburgh, where most of the 4.5 million people in Scotland live there. And you got to remember, Scotland's not a big place. I mean, geographically, it's about the size of the state of Indiana. The Highlands, which are so romanticized by everybody in the movies, Hollywood, and so forth, is about the size of Massachusetts and has about 250,000 people, 250,000 people. Yet it's a real powerful place, and because of the sporting estates that are in that area in the Highlands, and the fact that you have these urban rewilders who want to see nature be free, i.e., no human management of the land, which, let's face it, there's not a square inch of the planet. I mean, I don't care if we go to the highest point on Earth, Mount Everest. I mean, they've got used oxygen bottles laying around, all kinds of trash, over
Yeah,
120
let's not
dead
even get
bodies.
into that.
Yeah, but
You
my
know,
point is that there's everywhere you go on the planet, humans have an impact on it, and we have been managing this planet for our own species survival, and that's not going to change, especially with 8 billion humans on the planet. So, it's those people. If we want to see wildlife, then wildlife, it doesn't live in cities, it doesn't live on the top of mountains because most of them are covered under snow and ice most of the year. It lives on fertile ground. It could be farms, it could be ranches, it could be a sporting estate that's managed specifically for wildlife in Scotland, it could be a ranch in Montana. And it's the people that live with wildlife that have to see some sort of value. And if they don't see a value for it, then we've got thousands of years in human history where we've pretty well mucked things up. Case in point, my ancestors came over to North America in the 1620s and 1630s, and we pretty well utilized the resources thinking that they were infinite, and the natural resources, and we realized they weren't. And hence, we turned around in turn of the century 1900, and we came up with a lot better idea. So in the case of Scotland, I mean, there's some real issues going on there, and it's all being done, basically, from what I've been able to surmise from the time I've spent there, that it's about have and have nots. It's about jealousy towards land ownership. It's about historical bias. It has nothing to do with science and anything what's best for the land or best for wildlife. And that's really, at the end of the day, our goal is to make sure that we leave the planet better than we found it. And so it's really important that these urban people understand that the decisions they make every day do have a downstream effect, and they can be very negative, not only for wildlife, but they can also be negative for the basic rights, human rights of humans.
one thing when I previewed the show, pseudo Marxist, I didn't understand that's a big effect on what's happening over there because the Marxists don't want anybody to own anything.
Yeah, well, so this is again about, so the conflict is over land reform. So you've got people in the cities. I mean, let's just face it, people that live in the city, you know, 3, 4, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, obviously you have this aristocratic system that was ushered in, between Norman Saxon times, back in 1066 when William the Conqueror came over, when he started to take over the island, he kind of ushered in that Norman feudal system where, the kings Forest. Do you know what the true definition of of forest is?
No.
Okay, it has nothing to do with trees. It has everything to do with that's the king's hunting grounds. And so when you were a subject of the king, it didn't matter if you were a lord or a lady or whatever, and you were the baron of this or the earl of that or whatever, you control a certain amount of ground and you were expected to, pay homage to the monarch, right? And that's just the way it ran. And then of course, when things become more democratized and they got away from the monarch system, you start to have people that are like, well, they live in cities. They want to go out and recreate outside. I mean, all of us like to be outdoors, even, especially people live in cities. And, over a decade ago, the Scottish National Party, was voted in control of the Scottish Parliament. And they have a fair amount of autonomy from Westminster. And they turned around and created this law called the right to roam. Now, if you guys have never heard of what the right to roam is, just imagine no such thing as a trespassing law. You cannot be convicted of trespassing because there is no trespassing in Scotland. We were out working one day, the first time I went out there working on this project filming, and I told our local host, I said, hey, I'd really love to go up on that hill on the other side of that fence and get this great epic, scenic shot. He said, well, just jump over the fence. I'm like, what do you mean? Isn't that trespassing? Oh, no, we have the right to roam. I go, what is that? He says, we can go anywhere we want to. We can't hunt and fish on people's land, but we can go hiking, biking, we can camp out, we can walk anywhere, go anywhere we want, unless it's some sort of security issue or, safety deal. We can walk anywhere we want on anybody's property and they can't stop you. And I'm like, wow, that's different. It's definitely different than Montana. I mean, you could get shot for trespassing in Montana. And so that is part of that mindset of taking control of land, stopping people from being able to keep other people from doing things on that land. And so it was really a big eye opener there. And that's part of this, this mindset that, hey, you know what? I have the votes because I'm part of the urban class of people that are voting for a particular party. A politician wants power, so they need votes. So they tell the people that possess all the votes, hey, vote for me, and we'll pass this piece of legislation. Now, we see this in the United States all the time, don't we? We see
Yes.
this in situations where, hey, let's ban the hunting of trophy grizzly bears in British Columbia, or we're going to ban black bear hunting in Maryland or New Jersey. We're going to ban this or ban that if you vote for me. And we're seeing, in all over the world, the politicization of wildlife and habitat conservation, where, the anti-hunting lobby, based on their 990 tax returns, which are online on the IRS website, it's been analyzed. These people have about $1 billion they collect every year. And that money is not going towards wildlife and habitat conservation. It's not boots on the ground projects. It's paying for an army of Armani wearing $500 haircut suits, attorneys and lobbyists to go in and lobby the leaders of our country, the politicians, to enact laws to restrict conservation in the United States and abroad. That's
Why
how
do
they
they
raise
want
money.
that,
Well,
Tom?
it's about power and control. That's all this is. That's the one thing that really came to a head when I started working on this project in Scotland. You've got these rewilding groups. So the John Muir Trust, Trees for Life. There's a production company that's a nonprofit called Scotland, the Big Picture, that produces these nice glossy films. But, very, very one-sided, and that was one of the big issues for me when I did this film is like, if you don't allow opposing viewpoints when you create a film, then or write an article, a news article, then what you end up doing true journalism here, because it's half filmmaking, half investigative journalism. If you don't allow opposing viewpoints, then really all you're creating is propaganda, and you're not going to have any kind of impact there with decision makers. And especially the broader public, which is our target audience, is that suburban housewife, the middle of the road people that we know through focus group research are okay with hunting as long as it's done for the right reasons. And the right reason for 90% of them is consumption. And you can take that same group of people, and if you use the word trophy or safari as in front of the word hunting, they go into the 97% negative. So, as a hunter or anyone who's in the hunting community, the hunting industry, you have to realize that, only 4% of the US population buys a hunting license in any given year. And that's just rounded up to 10% for argument's sake. Well, when you see the politicization of wildlife and habitat conservation, i.e., that's banned types of hunting or trapping or whatever it is, or the importation of hunting trophies from Africa, the Big Five, whatever it is, what you're talking about is a scenario where you end up in the ballot box in November with hunters being 40% plus one vote behind before we even walk into the box. And that's if all hunters show up to vote, and they don't. And so people have got to realize, if we don't get social acceptance, and I mean, just, I'm not trying to recruit hunters here. I'm not trying to recruit, anybody that's going to compete with you for hunting. Yeah, we need to replenish our ranks every year, just like the wildlife that we hunt. We need to see them replenish their ranks so that we have a sustainable population to hunt every season. But at the end of the day, if we don't get the 60, 70, 80, maybe as 80% in certain parts of the country, if we don't get those people to agree that our modern conservation methods, that model is something that is a positive thing and affords us to have birds in a bird feeder, deer and turkeys in backyards, and heck, national forest land, it's all because of hunters who went hunting. If we don't get social acceptance of that, hunting, as you and I know it today, will be banned and regulated out of existence because it's mob rules when you get into some of this stuff. I mean, like a ballot initiative, they've got IP3 in Oregon right now, and I know they're dealing with this some ballot initiatives in Colorado over cat hunting. IP3 in Oregon would make it an automatic felony to harm any animal, wild or domestic. Now, you all think there's no way in the world they could ever get that on the ballot. Well, I just told you only 4% of the U.S. population buys a hunting license. If it's rounded up to 10% of Oregonians, are hunters, that still means there's 90% of the rest of the population out there. And they walk up to people on the streets. These are paid signature gatherers. And they ask people on the side of the road there at the corner of the street, and they go, "Do you believe in bestiality? Sex with an animal?" "No, I don't believe that." "Sign here." You don't want anybody to harm those precious animals. Now, I said this is wild or domestic. Now, you and I both know the domestic, trade of animals, when we're talking the cattle industry, the pork industry, the poultry industry, these guys got a lot of money. They've got millions and millions of dollars. They have junkyard dog attorneys on staff fighting for their ability to stay open and make a buck. The hunting industry, we alluded to this earlier on before we started, the hunting industry doesn't play very well. And I've been part of efforts where we've tried to get people in the room to at least talk to each other. And we failed, utterly failed. And I'm not used to losing. I'm not used to not winning. And it was really, really, it sucked. And, I liken it to, the analogy I use is the fishing hole. I'm not going to take you to my fishing hole because you might go back and fish it. And I think it's inherent in the human DNA that we have a little bit of competitiveness when it comes to our food historically. And you got to remember, this modern world we live in is only a byproduct of the advent and utilization of fossil fuels over the last 250 years. Because prior to that, I mean, what was the life expectancy in the United States? 45, 46, 48 years old?
If that.
If that. And people were, you had to farm. Now, prior to the Great Depression in 1930s, people had a relationship with someone in their family or a friend that had a farm or a ranch. You knew where your food came from. Yet right before COVID, there was a survey done with the high schoolers in the public school system of Chicago, and they asked them about their hamburger. And 50% of the kids didn't understand that their hamburger came from an animal. They thought it just came from the grocery store. They had no idea that an animal was involved in the making of their hamburger. That's pretty scary. But these are people that eventually, they turn 18, they can vote. And so our whole goal of the Shepherds of Wildlife Society is it's a platform that can speak to those people in the middle there, the majority of them, so that we get social acceptance of hunting, or modern conservation, with hunting being its main tool. And, there's some issues in the hunting stuff we could talk about too that we need to get to. There needs to be some things, and when it comes to ethics, we need to take a serious look at some things that we're doing because the optics suck. and we're going to lose this fight. And we're going to lose these elections. And it's unfortunate because I think we can win the whole thing, because at the end of the day, I mean, I ask people, there's a reason why, a campfire mesmerizes every human being in the world. And I mean, every human being sits around and wants to. I mean, even suburban America, everybody's got a little campfire circle out back if they got a little patch of ground there, right? Well, it's, and it has nothing to do with roasting marshmallows either. Humans have been looking at fires for a long time. Again, we're only talking about the last 250 years of human history, where we've now all of a sudden have this, Starbucks and airplanes and all these other things. And, we have the ability to produce almost unlimited amounts of food and store it almost for unlimited amounts of time. And that's what's allowed our species on this planet to grow into the populations where we are. And wildlife habitat's getting hammered. So getting back to Scotland, you've got this incredible wildlife habitat, this natural area that's evolved over thousands of years that doesn't have trees on it. Yet we see rewilders wanting to plant trees on these areas because they've romanticized trees. They think trees are the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, these aren't people that go hunting and fishing, but they also don't like red deer, because you've got red deer that have evolved for thousands of years on these heather upland moorland, without trees there. But all of a sudden you plant a plantation of conifers. And the crazy thing is, in a lot of cases over the last 100 years, they've been planting, and this is for a timber scheme that they tried to build in World War I and World War II for material for the war effort. And then again in the 80s and 90s, the government subsidized this whole tree planting timber industry, but they're planting Sitka spruce, Douglas fir, and larch. Sound familiar to you?
Yes.
Yeah, they're all North American species.
Right.
In fact, the ecologists tell me in the next 10 years that the predominant tree species in Scotland will be the Sitka spruce. Now, if that's not a travesty, I don't know, but it's even worse than that. I mean, Bruce,
How does that
so
get? How do they allow that though?
because the government pays for it, because they think that this is what the people want to do. So, I mean, it's all taxpayer
Yeah,
funded.
but
And so
get the flora and fauna that has been there for years and put that back there.
they don't care, Bruce, because it's owned by a private landowner, and we don't like him because we're the politicians have been elected by the people in the belt of the population belt of central Scotland. And we're going to have power and control. And eventually we're going to get this land. Back to your Marxist question, we're going to get this land from these people because they, in many cases, all of them, or most of them, got this land through some sort of illicit way. It was given to them because of their relatives or whatever. That's not the case. I've known many, many landowners that, they had a business, they made some money. Heck, I know one family that the father was a mortician in Glasgow, and he loved to shoot birds. He made enough money, he bought a couple thousand acres and started shooting birds and releasing pheasants on them. Of course, they release pheasants in like May and June, and then everything gets to eat them, and they have all kinds of laws against that are against the persecution of raptors, which it's still an issue. Gamekeepers are there are some bad apples in the bushel that are still doing some things, but there's so many things going on here, Bruce, that it just baffles the mind. I mean, the tree thing is one thing. The thing about the upland heather moorland, it's not very fertile. So, what really does well is that there's all kinds of, if you manage it for red grouse, the red grouse do really well. And that's the historic native bird that they've hunted there forever and ever and ever. And then because of what they do with the management, which is they do rotational burning on little quarter and half acre pieces. So it's kind of a mosaic and on 20-year rotations. And what it does is it takes off what they call the rank heather or the old growth heather, which will grow to be 3 or 4 feet high if you just let it grow, but it has no nutritional value to the grouse or any of the other birds that live in those habitats. So you get a bunch of new growth in these, again, quarter and half acre pieces right here, these little mosaics. And it's actually pretty cool looking when they do it. And it's very, very highly the keepers that have got this institutional knowledge and the equipment to do this. And so, I mean, the back burns, and it's a science, really, even though they don't have science degrees, they really have all this institutional knowledge. And it's back to the point where in some cases we feature in the film, they're able to stop the biggest forest fire in the history of the United Kingdom last year that started in a rewilded area. Kind of ironic. It was ground zero for the chairman for Trees for Life property, and then some adjacent public lands, government lands that were all rewilded, i.e., there was trees planted all over them. And so it's kind of crazy what goes on there. But there's one other thing that really, really gets my gall over there. I mean, obviously the fact that these families are being ostracized, and it's just not right. I liken it to like women hunters in America. If they post something online, they just get attacked by everybody and their brother, and just told all kinds of awful things. And my wife is Olivia is a very accomplished huntress, and has been recognized for hunting and conservation. And I mean, literally at once we had the Animal Liberation Front post a picture of her when she had shot a lion, and somehow gotten a picture of it and posted her home address and put a $50,000 bounty on her head. I mean, it's not about hunting, guys, anymore. This is about social norms. This is about societal norms. This is what we expect, what we want to live with as a society. And so this stuff has no place. And the same thing goes in Scotland. These people, these rural folks, they have every right that the urban folks have, but their voices get drowned out by the urban population. They don't have it. And so that's the first issue. We've got to make sure that these rural people, it's almost like they need their own Bill of Rights, so that their voices can be heard, because they're the ones that are doing the active work on the ground, the boots on the ground, the conservation work, the wise use of a natural resource. They're the ones that are enhancing what wildlife habitat we have, which we don't have a lot around the world anymore, folks. A lot of it's been slashed and burned, and it's very marginal farmland. It's overgrazed all over every continent. And where wildlife isn't going to exist if we don't have habitat. We won't even sit here and debate whether or not we're going to shoot one or pull the trigger, because it isn't going to exist. And that's
Well,
going to be our
in
legacy.
Colorado, I've been telling people, if we let people, exactly what you've been talking about, manage the wildlife at the ballot box, in 10 years, Colorado won't have what we have today. We won't have the herds, we won't have the species.
I mean, you can already kiss away your over the counter tags for elk. That's just a matter of years here, if not going to be sooner than later. I live up here in Montana, where we have a very, very robust population of wolves and grizzly bears. And there is no way in heck in this state we could ever have over the counter tags, because we just don't have the resource, and Colorado won't have it either. And that's a legacy. People talk about the fact, like, hey, these wolves made Yellowstone into this great environment, great habitat, because there was too many elk on the landscape. Yeah, there was too many elk on the landscape. If we could hunt them in the national park, that would make a big difference. But we can't. There's only one national park, I think, in the Big Island of Hawaii, where you can hunt. All the other national parks, they don't allow any hunting. So you get this land that just, I mean, there's the natural processes and stuff. Again, we don't have a lot of wildlife habitat left on this planet. And what we have, I think we have a responsibility as being the most destructive species on the planet to take care of what's left, and what we do have, we need to enhance it. And that's what I tell these people in Scotland. It's like, hey, there's only so much ground here for red grouse. That's their habitat, is these ecosystems they live in, this upland heather moorland. Well, when you plant trees on it, it's not upland heather moorland. Now, here's the real kick, Bruce. A lot of this stuff, and you got to remember, 9,000 years ago, Scotland was covered under glacial ice.
Right.
So, of course, the ice receded. Of course, there wasn't any airplanes or factories or trains and automobiles at that time, but the ice receded, and you had the colonization of the island by vegetation and animals. And, the scientists will tell you that, yeah, there was probably a pretty decent amount of tree coverage on Scotland, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years ago. Now you get 60 inches of rain. And when you get all that rain going through that tree cover, through those pine needles and those leaves, you literally get acidification of the soil. I mean, this
The
happens all over the
acid.
world. Yeah,
Right.
you get an acid. I mean, you've probably been down into a swamp, right? And what color is the water in a cedar swamp or a cypress swamp? It's tea color, right? It's stained from the acids from the leaves of the trees that live in that environment. That's just how nature works. And so in Scotland, where you don't have swamps, you have this land that's full of a lot of rocky granite, and you get this peat, which peat is the breaking down of organic material. And eventually the trees die out because the soils get, you literally get pot soils. You get to the soil that's so acidic that even earthworms can't live in it. And that's very prevalent across the highlands. And then in many cases, you'll get a formation of an iron hard pan 2 to 3 feet below the surface. Now that iron hard pan, a sapling's tree roots cannot penetrate it. So there's no trees there. And that's the reason. That is the wild, native wilderness of Scotland. That's what Mother Nature intended it to be. Yet you have these rewilders that want to plant trees all over it. Now, in the case of the iron hardpan, there is a real move because of this climate crisis. And I'm not giving you an opinion one or the other, but that's something that we talk about, right? Climate crisis. And there is climate change occurring in Scotland. We're seeing some things that are affecting like tick loads on chicks of red grouse because it's warmer throughout the year. They're not having near the bad winters. The tick loads they're coming out and hatching earlier. It's coinciding when the chicks are being born, and they're getting so many ticks around their eyes and their beaks that it's killing them. It's killing the birds, the chicks. And then you've got this scenario with disease, Liping L disease, which is like a 80-90% mortality on mature red grouse. And it's really having an impact, and it's to the point where, you have these things going on, these factors, and then you're planting trees and you're destroying the habitat because red grouse don't live in trees. They live in open heather moorland that's preferably fairly young heather growth on it because they eat the shoots that come out of that. And you've got a scenario too where this land isn't very productive except for grouse and deer and some sheep grazing on it. So definitely way less productive than say farmland down below in the glens. So you've got multinational corporations that are trading in carbon credits. And they're buying up these estates because a lot of these estate owners have been hammered by the government with rules and regulations, whatnot,
And
to the point where
taxes.
yeah, and taxes. So they can't run these estates because they're subsidizing them themselves. They don't give any government. They don't get a penny of government money to manage and do the conservation work on this. They pay for it through their own pocket. And none of these sporting estates pay. I don't know of any of them that are self-sufficient. They don't sell enough hunting and fishing to pay the bill. So the landowner is using money from some other source to subsidize the management of the land. And so when you get hammered and hammered with rules and regulations and laws and all this other stuff, then eventually you say, you know what? A beer company comes along and says, I'll give you $6 million for your estate. Okay, I'm going to take the money and I don't have to worry about this anymore. It's kind of like our ranchers out here in Montana. They're trying to eke out a living, and you get to the point where the ranch is worth some crazy amount of money that doesn't pencil out at all for somebody running cows.
No.
And so, but at the end of the day, these multinational corporations, in this case, there's a beer company there in Scotland, wants to be the very first beer company to be carbon neutral. And what they're doing is they're planting trees on this upland heather moorland where you have this iron hardpan. Now, Bruce, I don't know how many trees you've planted, but I've planted tens of thousands of trees here in Montana by hand. You use the dibble bar. It's a steel bar. You stick it in the ground. You push it across the side. You stick that bare rootstock seedling down in there, and you tamp it around. Make sure it's sticking straight up and down. And
Go on to the next one.
Yeah, go on to the next one. They plant trees with 45-ton tractors, excavators. Every 3 or 4 feet, they drive along, driving over the top of all this incredible heather upland moorland, which, by the way, in the 92 UN conference on biodiversity in Rio, they designated upland heather moorland as an ecosystem of importance, i.e. concern, i.e. it's limited. In fact, over 50% of the world's total heather upland ecosystem exists in the United Kingdom, most of it in the Scottish Highlands. And they're driving 45-ton trackhoes, digging holes through this thing every 3 to 4 feet. And then they're planting, in many cases, thick spruce, Douglas fir, and larch. Now, it just baffles my mind, and I didn't really fully understand it. I went out to one of these estates the first time, and I had a photographer that works with us, Neil McIntyre, one of our fellows.
And you got about 5 more minutes before you get your hard stop.
And so we went ahead and he showed me what was going on where they were digging. The diggers were out there digging, and I'm just like, what is going on here? And I met with this ecologist, Dr. James Fenton, who's a trustee for the National Trust for Scotland, pretty serious dude. Did an interview with him, and he says, yeah, Tom, this is crazy. This is what's going on here. And they're digging through this iron hardpan. And I'm like, well, I didn't really realize that. I went back out to the same property 3 or 4 months later, and every place where they dug a hole, guess what color the soil was?
White,
Orange, and red. It was rust. I mean,
Because
they'd
it,
broken through
well,
the
the
iron and been
oxygen,
rained on. Yeah, the oxygenated, it rained on the exposed dirt with the oxygen, and the soil was literally rusting. And by the way, the
and
government spent.
that'll kill the seedling, right?
Well, it's interesting enough you say that because the government subsidized that project to the tune of $668,000, almost $750,000, taxpayer dollars, to pay for those excavators and to plant those trees. And I'm thinking they're looking. Last I heard, they're looking at a 60 to 7% mortality rate on trees, and they've destroyed thousands and thousands of years of soil history. So there's two things I want to see. Like I said, I want to make sure that these urban people, urban people realize that the rural folks, they have rights. They got to have a Bill of Rights. They have to have their voice out there, and it has to be measured. It can't be, one vote. These people are out there doing the work, and they have every right to realize their human rights from the hard work they're doing. A good paying job, their kids have a chance to go to school, an opportunity there. Over there, healthcare is, government paid for, but the things that they need in order to survive, they need to be able to have those things. And the other thing is this planting trees with 45-ton track goes, that needs to be banned and outlawed. Anywhere where there's an iron hard pan, we need nature, which has evolved over 1,000 years, to be what it is intended to be, not what the conscript of rewilders or carbon credits. So that's really the big things about this film that I think people, we want to give a voice to these rural folks. And at the end of the day, if they have a voice and they can realize their most basic human rights, then we found that the vast majority of people in the middle out there, the 60, 70, 80%, they're going to be okay with making sure that wildlife gets utilized and is managed properly. And we're going to have wildlife and healthy ecosystems and clean drinking water all around the planet in perpetuity. And that's really what it's about. It's about making sure we leave the planet better than we found it.
So let's talk about Shepherds of Wildlife. How somebody, they want to get involved with what you're doing, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm on all, myself, Tom Opre, OPRE. I'm on all the Twitters and Instagrams and Facebook and all that stuff, LinkedIn. But you can also find Shepherds of Wildlife on all those social media channels. And then you can go to shepherdsofwildlife.org to get information about what we're doing. If you want to get signed up for the latest in what we're doing with the Last Keeper, which is on tour right now throughout the United Kingdom and theaters there. Going to be playing in some theaters here in the United States. And then June 29th of this month, we're having a digital cinema event where the film will be available. Anybody that comes to shepherdsofwildlife.org. And if you want to sign up for updates, just go to shepherdsofwildlife.org/keeper, KEEPER, and sign up for information about the film. And, you might be able to watch it online. You might have a theater come, that'll be available. And we do have an hour-long version of the film that will be broadcasting on Valley PBS in California coming up this year. And then the plan is to have it available later on this year, first of next year, on all PBS stations, all 330 across the country.
So, folks, you might not give a rip about hunting, but you should give a rip about the planet we live on. Hunters make up the strongest conservationists, and more good has been done in the United States through the North American model of wildlife conservation than any place. We have more deer, turkey, elk, and you can go down the list of what's available today. And we have to stop ballot initiatives that are going to hurt the species. They're going to kill the species. Save the Hunt, Colorado, go to it and donate $1, but become involved, because it's only with people like Tom and myself and thousands of other people that give a rip about this country and this planet. And I've seen a lot of it. Tom's seen a heck of a lot more than I have, but I've been places that just takes your breath away. And so that's what hunting has done for me. It's taken me places, people, cultures, and environments that I would never have seen otherwise. So on behalf of Tom Opre, this is Hutch on Hunting saying thank you so much, and go out and have a fantastic day.